This is a second public workshop on a historical preservation ordinance in Camden. The material will be very similar to what we delivered on Thursday night, if not exactly similar. What will be different will be the questions and discussion we have afterwards. But we are here today to have an informal discussion and presentation about historical preservation and a historical preservation ordinance in Camden. Thanks everyone for attending. I know there's been a lot of contentious issues both locally and nationally, so I'm glad you've got the fortitude to take on another issue here. The format is we have about a 30-minute presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A. And we do have a questionnaire at the end that we'll distribute and hopefully get your input. So we are the Historic Resources Committee. There's 5 of us and 2 alternates, although our 2 alternate positions are not filled at the moment. So one of the things that might come out of these discussions are people who are really interested in being a part of the Historic Resource Committee and being a part of formulating and drafting the Historic Preservation Ordinance as alternate members. The Historic Resources Committee was founded in 1992. 4 of the 5 members are here today. I'm Chris Frieden, the chair. We have Chris Fasselt, who was a founding member, Jennifer Gramata and Danny Solomon. Brian Boyd is not here today. When we were founded, there were several duties laid out in the town code and further elaborated on in the comprehensive plan. But one of the main duties is that we are to recommend ordinances for the purpose of historic preservation within the town. So that's really why we're here today and why we've been working on what we've been working on. We are all volunteers, obviously. We do this because we care about history and we care about Camden. It's not a particularly sexy committee. We kind of work in the background. But we have put a lot of time and we're really working, continuing the work of a lot of Historic Resources Committee members who put in a lot of hours. So I want to acknowledge everyone who's come before us who really kind of started the work on historic preservation in the town. So what is historic preservation? Well, Secretary of the Interior defines it as the act or process of applying measures necessary to sustain the existing form, integrity, and materials of a historic property. And then a historic preservation ordinance is a local statute that's enacted to protect buildings and neighborhoods from destruction or insensitive rehabilitation. So in the state of Maine, all of the protection of historic properties falls on local ordinances and local municipalities. The laws that we create are the ways in which we protect our historic resources. There's often a misunderstanding that if something is on the National Register, that it is protected from demolition. It is not. Only town ordinances or town historic preservation ordinances have that authority. And that's largely why we're here talking to you today. So, so what are the reasons for a historic preservation ordinance? Well, kind of the large sketch, it's that an HPO maintains community pride in its heritage and history. It protects investments of owners and residents of historic properties by positively impacting the local economy through tourism and enhancing business recruitment potential. Camdenites already are good custodians of Camden. You know, the town has been here for quite a while. Its nature has not changed dramatically, although there have been changes. Homeowners here, property owners, generally care for their properties and care about history. But the demographics have been changing in Maine and in our town. We are the fastest growing state in New England. And currently all we have is a 120-day demolition delay. So that is really the only local statute that prevents, it doesn't even prevent, it just delays demolition of historic properties. The population in Maine increased by 50% in 2023, which is more than the decade that preceded it, from 2010 to 2019. We've had a huge in-migration of younger families, younger people, international residents, and the demographics of the state are changing. And the Maine Development Foundation's measure of growth says that the medium-priced home in the state of Maine rose 50% between 2020 and 24. And we are a magnet for second home buyers. We rank #1 in the country for the share of housing stock that's classified as a second home. Over 21% of the state's housing is second homes. And all you have to do is walk around one of the historic districts in the winter, and you'll see how many vacant homes there are. So all of these conditions mean the area is rife for changing home ownership and for renovation and potential demolition. Let's see. Okay, so there's a long history of preservation here in Camden and in the United States, dating all the way back to 1850. Mount Vernon was one of the kind of first milestones in the national discussion of historic preservation. When it was decaying, there were all kinds of discussion around antiquity and what does history mean in this country. But the acts of preservation really officially began in 1966 with the National Historic Preservation Act. Shortly thereafter, 3 years later, in 1969, in Rockland, we had our own controversy when the Custom House and Post Office were demolished. And that led to further discussions about historic preservation in this area, in the Mid-Coast. And I've listed some of the milestones here, but basically beginning in 1980, there was a succession, lots of events where citizens led petitions or campaigns to preserve the Camden Harbor, the Opera House, and the Post Office, leading to the formation of our committee in 1992, as recommended by the Comprehensive Plan and born out of a controversy with the Village Green. And then since that time, there were a lot of efforts to develop a historic preservation ordinance. I have a draft of the 2011 historic preservation ordinance that was never put forward in front of the town. But this has been an ongoing conversation now for multiple decades. And then just last year, on the town warrant in November, we asked the town, do you want us to proceed with the drafting of a historic preservation ordinance? And it was approved overwhelmingly yes. Anecdotally, we hosted a Chestnut Historic District walk last year. I have the map there. And it really tells the story of so many of our historic homes have these bright past, and people who took that walk were very positive about our historic preservation efforts. And it's just clear how much the town, the state, and the nation are all invested in historic preservation. We have lost these properties over the years. Most of these properties all of these properties are in the historic districts. This is a partial list, but it gives a good idea of the kind of properties we are losing in town. And just as of yesterday, we had an application for demolition that we had to review for Dillingham Point, and that is scheduled for demolition in September. So this is something that is going to continue to accelerate. We're going to continue to see older homes demoed. And again, we only have a 120-day delay. We cannot stop it. So what are some of the benefits of a historic preservation ordinance in Camden? Well, first and foremost, it saves historic properties. But it also provides guidance on restoration and renovation to homeowners and to architects. It preserves the unique history and identity and fosters community pride. It attracts new families and new businesses. It strengthens the tourist economy, and it stabilizes property values within historic districts. Historic district homes in historic districts have been shown to appreciate faster than homes outside of historic districts. And it also enables access to grants, bonds, and tax incentives that are tied to historic preservation. So preservation is an exercise of community. It's an exercise of a community value. People have deep attachments to old places. It gives a sense of belonging, continuity, identity, and shared memories. The history of a place is deeply rooted in physical characteristics, meaning that the tangible parts of a structure, tangible heritage, helps us to remember intangible parts of heritage. And I like this quote from President Lyndon Johnson's speechwriter, that we do not use bombs to destroy irreplaceable structures related to the story of America's civilization. We use the corrosion of neglect or the thrust of bulldozers. Connections between successive generations of Americans are broken by demolition. Preservation and tourism. In 2024, last year, visitors directly spent over $1 billion in the Mid-Coast, supporting 13,000 jobs, contributing over $500 million in wages, and saved every household over $2,000 in state and local taxes. The Maine Office of Tourism issues each year a destination management plan to the governor. And increasingly since 2022, there's been an increasing focus on heritage and cultural tourism. Right now, over 2/3 of domestic visitors to Maine are from out of state, and they're coming for our distinctive sites and history and experiences. And heritage visitors spend more per day, stay longer, and visit more places than tourists in general. As far as the local economy, well, preservation enhances real estate values and fosters local businesses. Ironically, by preserving the past, we're making an investment in the future. Historic landmarks definitely increase tourism, which in turn bolsters the local economy via job creation and revenue. But it also, as I've said, appreciates property values, gives us access to grants and tax initiatives. And this last bullet point, in Maine, there is a pool of federal grant money, which is earmarked for certified local governments. So if you're a town like ours that has created a historic preservation ordinance, there's a higher standard called a certified local government, where you apply to the state of Maine, who certifies you. And as a CLG, you have access to a pool of federal money that is earmarked specifically for those certified local governments. There's some projects here in town that I think might be able to benefit from CLG status. The Camden Lighthouse restoration, the Yacht Club's climate resiliency work, and there are other projects, even perhaps the Opera House restoration plans. But there are projects here in town that might have access to CLG money if we had that status. So Chris Fasold here is going to speak to preservation and architecture.
Doing old buildings is fun, and I've been involved with
we need your mic. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. And I've been doing old buildings, involved with them since I was a kid. And but I was trained in modern architecture mainly from photographs that I saw in the 60s of buildings which are now landmarks or historic, like Albert Kahn and things like that. But anyway, when I worked around Chicago, San Francisco, and then I came to Maine because of my wife who lives here, and her grandmother lived here. And there wasn't a whole lot of steel frame modern buildings to do. So, but I had done bunches of this stuff. And one of the problems for the architect, we're proposing an addition to the zoning ordinance to the standards of which all buildings must be the permitted for. And I forgot where I was. Well, anyway, the projects that we have in the town are limited to 3 districts in the town, which are overlay districts for the town and do not necessarily conform to the zoning districts. And each of those zones has a different quality of buildings. 2 of them are almost strictly residential, High Street and Chestnut Street, while the fire district, which is the downtown, basically Main Street up to the Camden to here, are almost strictly commercial, and which are anyway. But most of the work that needs to be done to satisfy the ordinance and requires a lot of research and information, which for the building owner should be or could be very much fun. But also it can be daunting if you don't know where to go. And our Historic Preservation Commission in Augusta has just loads and loads of information on this. And this is all briefs about how to do it. And most architects really don't know all this unless they've been involved in it. But the Historic Preservation Commission also has done this. I have 2 volumes of these. And these are preservation briefs, which talk about the various things. And you have to do windows, storefronts, roofing, and all that, and how to do it, and prepare yourself for the contractors that are going to say they don't want to do it. And they also have these wonderful volumes of books on not all, but most of the buildings and landscapes historically done by architects and their history of them and all that. So if you're researching your structure, you can figure out who did it and why they did it and what was going on about that. You know that?
Okay. Danny, you're going to speak to deconstruction and reuse.
So one sort of growing movement in the United States and actually worldwide is to transition away from demolition completely. So when a building reaches the end of its life cycle, even historic buildings, if they can't be preserved and must be taken down, to do this in a careful and respectful way rather than bulldoze it. So deconstruction, just sort of a brief definition, is to take a building down piece by piece in order to maximize the recovery of reusable materials. And so I've been working before moving to Maine in a lot of cities that have gone really far with deconstruction. Buffalo, New York, for example. There are some cities that have actually created policies that mandate this, like Portland, Oregon, for example. And this is all pretty recent, but it is proving to be a really important way to not only preserve the past, but also to keep materials out of the landfill, to make materials, in some cases, really affordable to people, and as a great workforce development initiative. So a lot of really positive reasons to do this. So we recently deconstructed a building in one of our historic districts that we weren't able to preserve as is, and that's always the goal. I don't want to advocate for deconstruction when it's unnecessary, but if a building needs to be down, it can be deconstructed. So we took down 59 Chestnut Street. Here are some images of that project. You can see that's just one photo of some of the material that came from that project, but we recovered probably upwards of 80%, excluding the foundation. The materials in these older homes are really high value too. They're materials that you can't find anymore, all old growth lumber. And in a lot of cases, materials that you might need to do a historic restoration, we would be able to provide because those materials are usually appropriate. So I think that's about it, I'll say today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So here in the state of Maine, we have over 20 municipalities that already have a historic preservation ordinance, and we have 12 certified local governments, and most of them are situated near or on the coast along what I think you would call a tourist route. I think there's no coincidence there that tourists are coming into historic towns, going to historic landmarks, and these towns are actively working to preserve those sites. Towns of similar size to Camden that are CLGs have benefited from grants. And I reached out to about 12 of the other commissioners in other towns and just had a casual phone interview to hear about their best practices, what worked, what didn't work. And overall, they were very positive and bullish on having a historic preservation ordinance, that their approval of applications was very high. And when they did deny, it was usually a working out together with a property owner to find a solution. And I really like this quote from York, that an HPO maintains value in historic districts, that character can't be separated from history, that visitors and residents look for that character. Some towns try to recapture history, but we don't want to wait until a beloved building is gone. So what are the specific components of a historic preservation ordinance? There's more documentation there on the table, but just at the top level, they begin with a statement of purpose and definition of their terms. They establish a historic preservation commission. In the case of Camden, it would be converting the Historic Resources Committee to a historic preservation commission, laying out the terms of that commission. Then there's a criteria for historic designation. Again, here in this town, we've already historically designated our districts and some properties. So those would be specified within the ordinance, because the ordinance only applies to those things that have historic designation or are listed in the ordinance itself. Then it lays out a review process for future applications. There's an enforcement mechanism, and then an appeal process for somebody who might be denied. Some additional features that of our specific historic preservation ordinance, I've already said we would convert our committee to a commission, but our ordinance would apply only to those designated historic district sites and landmarks in the article itself. And the next slide lists those out. But some people don't understand that the historic preservation ordinance only applies to the exterior of buildings, but it will not regulate exterior details like paint color. As you drill down into the details, our goals will be to have the most simple and easy and manageable approach, but we would conform as we have to the standards set forth by the Secretary of the Interior. So the big statement goal is that we want to protect heritage while supporting repairs and renovations for energy efficiency and contemporary usage. So I have some printed maps here. There's a representation of the historic overlay map. These have already achieved historic designation, these sites, and these would be the historic resources that would be defined in the ordinance itself. These are also the same things that were specified in the 2024 warrant that was approved by voters, with one addition, the Conway House at the bottom, which is the Camden Rockport Historic Society. So that would be one addition identified in a historic preservation ordinance. So process and timeline. first and foremost, engaging with the public, have workshops like this, have people attend our meetings, and begin to draft a document. The state of Maine has really pointed us to the town of Castine's historic preservation ordinance as a model. So that is kind of a platform from which we plan to build from. After we draft the historic preservation ordinance, we will go through the review and revision process with the planning board, town officials, and the Maine Historic Preservation Commission. Then that will lead to the select board review and public hearings, and then hopefully a public vote for June 2026. That's what we're targeting. In conclusion, the objectives of a HPO has been endorsed by Camden voters and this committee. Historic preservation is a vital conversation with our past about our future, and once a historic building is gone, it is gone forever. So if you are interested in staying involved, we meet on the second Monday of the month at 4 o'clock. We just met yesterday. All of our meetings are streamed live and then available after the fact on YouTube. We also have a social media presence, which you can check out. And then that email address is a way to correspond with us. And we will eventually be creating a mailing list, perhaps asking for polling and additional feedback. So that is the end of our presentation, and we are anxious to open this up to questions and answers. Any questions? Yes, Tyler.
I've actually quite a few little comments or questions for you guys. I can turn it over to other people if they need. I don't want to steal time. So for me, I live in a historic house, 1889 on C Streets. I enjoy historic homes. I do think there's a bigger thing happening that I think people enjoy an appropriate New England vernacular for the whole town. And so I guess I would encourage more of a residential architectural standards coming into the land use ordinance, as opposed that would be across the whole town, as opposed to specific historic districts. Because if you took your map that you had on that previous page and all those buildings were maintained exactly how they were or updated period appropriate, but every other building that was not in those areas changed to whatever anyone wanted that was not appropriate for what we would consider New England vernacular, I would say our town would have lost its character. Those are certainly nice stretches, but I think there's a bigger community thing as opposed to just picking little areas. So I know there's always been hesitancy about adding architectural standards to the land use ordinance. I don't know if that's a subjective thing but it's certainly something that's done with commercial properties. Typically within the land use ordinance, commercial properties have particular architectural standards they have to meet. I haven't dug down in the Camden one for a while, but I know in Rockport there's a lot of commercial ones, but very little or no residential requirements regarding architectural design of new structures or additions. So I would encourage more of a broad scope on that. I think it'd be good for this.
Should we just talk about each point? Or,
absolutely. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's no definitive answer to what you said. I mean, that's certainly a viewpoint. And I think there are a lot of people in town who would agree with what you're saying. There's also been so much conversation on this topic and so much pushback on having standards that are town-wide. And it has been 20 years of trying to get something in place. And we already have gone through an elaborate historic designation process for our districts and for our landmarks. And I think it would be such an uphill battle to try and move further with that to what you're describing. And I think there'd be a lot of pushback in terms of people seeing that as maybe moving the town into an HOA type situation, or, I grew up in California, and Santa Barbara's planning board, it's people are delayed years and years on their projects. And I mean, we could point to many towns facing those kinds of standards. And it seems to me that is too big of a battle to fight, and may not even be what the community wants.
Mm-hmm.
And I see the baby step of taking the things that we've already designated historic and protecting those as kind of the appropriate next step. But I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky, and maybe it's part of, it's hard because most small structures may not go through the whole planning process that perhaps commercial or, properties that have to push the envelope on some ordinance. But I think I think there's a lot of opportunity when people develop things. And I think Dillingham Point's a great example. I mean, because there's a structure that I would say is appropriate for doing in vernacular. I mean, they're an architect that's kind of known for that. And I would love to have something within our ordinance, our town, that recognizes that and says, thank you. I think there's definitely structures that have been built in our town, the building beside where the candy shop was on Bayview Street. I think it's a very period and appropriate building for our town. And while it's nice to go by and see something that's built in the 1800s or something like that, I appreciate just as much something that is architecturally appropriate.
It's a great point. Chris?
Um,
Can you move your mic just a little closer? Sir?
Okay. We already have all that. There's our zoning ordinance, which includes the building permit process, covers all buildings, and the standards that are set by those standards, those building standards as shown in the building code, the basic building code. If you want to do your house, I'm not in the district, and you want to respect the history and the style and the construction of that, you can do it up to the limits of what's permitted. The question is for us to get the word out to somebody when they're buying a house that there are things that can be done correctly or incorrectly to their house. And it doesn't destroy or make it any more special, but it is an historic thing. But the ordinance, the zones, the overlay zones have standards that are specific to those elements of an historic building or historic structure.
I would respectfully disagree.
I can't see how you can go and just spread that over town, that if you live in an old house that you should have to maintain these standards, unless you have your house declared put on the registry. But that doesn't get you anything other than maybe you could have a plaque.
Well, I don't believe maybe we're talking two different things, but my understanding of the current land use ordinance that the town of Camden has enacted has very few architectural standards for residential properties.
Well, architectural standards are based on the building codes.
Yeah, I would say the building code.
And the history and development of materials.
Sure, I'm just saying we don't have any architectural standards in the building codes. Is not architectural
But
standards.
I mean, it's how can you describe architectural standards?
Well, for example, in Rockport,
I've done it for 50 years, and I only know a few of the standards.
in the Rockport land use ordinance for commercial properties, there's there's about 20 pages in there, very specific about roof pitch, about elevation of max building height versus the eave height, things like that, definitions about what a mansard is, what a mansard isn't. So there is some aspects in there.
Before you continue, Tyler, I'm just curious, our Zoom participants, I want to make sure you get the opportunity to ask a question if you have one. Okay, great. Go ahead, Tyler.
The other question, the challenge for this group would be I would love to be able to have be people excited about putting their houses in these. And I haven't figured out how to do that, whether like, as opposed to, it comes across as a stick, not a carrot. It'd be interesting to figure out how, whether it's a tax incentive, a grants, some type of board. It's like someone's like, oh, this is great. I'm in this district. It opens up all these great opportunities for me. It'd be nice to figure out how to make that so people are excited about having that. And I don't know what that looks like. And maybe that's examples from other towns as opposed to something forced upon them.
Yeah, I mean, that too is a great point. My hope is, and maybe this is naive or too optimistic, but I mean, I definitely see historic preservation as a community decision that people in the town decide to participate in. And that preservation ordinances are always a balance between homeowner rights and the common good. And my hope is that with enthusiastic support of the town, that those homeowners in the historic districts don't perceive this as something being done to them, but something they are doing for the town. And they will benefit from it as well. So I hope to turn that narrative around, that we're not imposing rules on people. People are stepping in to participate in something that's great for the town.
Yeah, I just think it'll be a challenge. The only other comment I had was on the Conway House, just as a note, the actual physical house is in Rockport.
No, it's not. It's
No, the
oldest
Conway House-
in Camden, but the
I've
house
actually-
itself, Conway House, is in Camden.
Yeah, the Conway House is in Camden. I've looked at the documentation. I know it's like,
I'm on the board of directors and we looked at it. The only property I believe is the
this is from
caretaker's
Susan
cottage.
herself, has confirmed and shown me that
So
okay.
I'll
We'll
double check.
clarify later.
Let's double check. So
Yeah.
So obviously it splits the two towns. So that's it. Thank you.
But then, Tyler, I mean, you clearly would be a very valuable participant, so I hope that you can make it to some of our meetings and help shape this. So, you've got to have a question or a comment.
I guess one thing, so I did pick up the Castine ordinance.
You did?
I've been through that.
Great. Is that mic on?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it? Okay. Yeah, I'm very soft-spoken. Sorry about that. One thing I see is they have a 93-page design manual behind their ordinance.
Mhm.
Are you contemplating having anything like that?
At this point, we do, that's very common. It's very common to have a
Okay.
preservation ordinance and then a design manual. At this point, in conversations with our planning, we are wanting to take the step of creating kind of design sheets. So for very specific issues, issuing white papers essentially for those questions, rather than going to produce a whole design manual is a big undertaking. And it's not something I want to do right off the bat. Maybe there will become a time when that will make sense, but I think it'd be more of a white paper situation.
Yeah, I'm assuming they paid for this because it has somebody's name from Bangor on it. So, I mean, they didn't do this themselves. One thing I was a little surprised, activities requiring a historic preservation certificate, contributing properties. And I know you've mentioned several times, hey, we're not going to regulate your paint color. Okay, great. However, basically anything else under this Castine ordinance, any change in the exterior appearance as visible from the street, blah, 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 except for exterior painting. So basically anything you do to your house that changes its appearance, you have to get a historic preservation certificate. Do you
Read the end of that sentence. That contributes to its historic.
No, it doesn't say that. I'll read the whole thing. Contributing properties. Any change in the exterior appearance as visible from the street or associated public land of an historic landmark site, individual historic property, or any structure as defined in section 2.24 in an historic district by addition reconstruction, or alteration, except for exterior painting. I mean, basically, it's anything. So my house is on 50 Main Street. It's hot. I put 3 air conditioners in the windows. That's okay under this ordinance because it's an impermanent change. However, I'd like to have mini splits. My lot is very small, so you can see anything on my house from
So-
either Main Street or Central or whatever. I would need your approval to put mini splits on my
Not
house.
necessarily, but go ahead.
Absolutely.
I know I put 6 in 2 years ago, and I'm in the High Street Historic District, so I'm really concerned about it. So one of the things that we talked about after the last meeting was to come up with a set of case studies that we could walk through, that we could take an actual, like a thing that you would do to your house, right?
Yep.
And that we could walk through what would happen if someone who had a house in the historic district came and they need to put a new roof on, right? Would they have to come for a permit? How would we assess that? How would we evaluate it? What kinds of things? If someone wanted to put heat pumps in, how would we evaluate that? What would the criteria be? So I think we're thinking all these things. So I mean, we have to get to some point to the brass tacks, right? Yeah, and we kind of have to do some, like, for lack of a better word, test cases.
I mean, reading or not really reading, but going quickly through the 93-page design manual, if you want to do a new roof on your historic structure, then you pretty much have to make it look like what was there. If it had a historic roof, so if you had a slate roof, you have to use material that's going to look like slate. If it was metal, it's going to be metal. If it's, I don't know what else you have here, some kind of shakes, you have to do something that's at least is going to look like that. Matter of fact, anything that you change, you put in a door, you put any exterior feature of the house, you basically have to replicate the appearance of that under the principles here. And if you can, it uses the words, if it's possible, you have to use the original material. Now possible, a lot of things are possible. They may not be economically feasible for a homeowner. I mean, pretty much anything's possible. I mean, you can have somebody come in and, carve it up for you using, whittle it or whatever. But I mean, the standards here, they're a little bit scary if this is what's going to happen.
Well, first of all, the Castine ordinance is not our ordinance. It's a platform for us to dive off
I
of.
understand. Yep.
But they are also a CLG, so they are meeting the standards of the state of Maine in order to qualify as a CLG. That's going to be a conversation we're going to have. Do we want to be a CLG or do we not? If we are, the standards are going to be a little bit higher. But kind of embedded in your question is I mean, the idea here is not to create a gotcha ordinance where we're going to trap people who are making minute changes to their house. The idea is to work with homeowners and maintain historic appearances, character of the community and home. So if you're having a historic preservation ordinance, you're going to preserve history. But those kinds of details are to be determined. So.
Yeah, I guess I circle back. I guess I thought it was very interesting that I think there was somebody here last time from, was it Rockland?
Yeah.
And they're doing their ordinance.
Yes.
And they've landed on having something that is solely advisory. And I'd repeat something I think I said last time, which is, I mean, so much has been preserved without anything like this. I mean, you walk down Chestnut Street, you do that tour, you walk up Main Street to High Street. I mean, I would just circle back to ask, is this really necessary? And I understand, the intentions are good. We want to create a public good, but the only way to do that is by putting restrictions on the current property owners. I mean, I'm not contemplating doing anything else to my house for many years. I've already done enough. But I mean, when I go to sell that house, I mean, have you guys had any discussions with realtors or other experts in real estate value? I mean,
Well,
I
studies
understand-
that I've looked at has shown that resale it's actually a pro, that the home is in historic district. What's that?
That's BS. If you have no studies that show that this increases value or maintains value, because.
Yes, I do.
You don't.
No, I do.
You're making up a lot of numbers, and you're making a lot of claims about economic activity that I don't think is true. And, you know, all those numbers that you recited.
Yes.
People come here, you're attaching it to historic preservation, and I just don't think that's right. I don't think that's based in real economics or science. And I think the history of these ordinances is they do grow, just like this gentleman says, they grow to become these, you know, you have committees, and you go down to Portland. I've owned a lot of properties, historic properties in downtown Portland. And it's a constant, in Portland, they pulled a bunch of pictures from a snapshot in town, and my name's Matt Warren. I own a house on High Street, 24 High Street, lovingly restored brick house. What's that? I own the Cappies or the Sea Dog building. I've owned the mill. I own the Thomas Michaels building. I tore down a gas station and built what's now the First National Bank in Danvers, the first, which was a gas station, which this committee probably would have decided was historic back when I tore it down in 1990 something. Did you do that one, Chris?
I've been there though.
You did my dad's house on Chestnut Street. That probably wouldn't be allowed these days.
Yeah, I thought about that. I wonder if, because it's visible from Bayview Street and Chestnut Street. And the Bayview Street is obviously wouldn't make it through if all elevations were included.
But what you're saying, I mean, it's all well intentioned, but that's not the history of these things in real life. You know, once they get initiated, it's just, you know, it's these things take on a life of their own, and the next group of people who are going to be on the committee. And I've been here long enough to know that the original group actually did try to dictate paint colors. That may be gone now, and you guys probably weren't around when that happened, but I've been here long enough. Paint colors were on the agenda at one point. So
I actually think paint colors are more important than whether you put heat pumps in or not. Because if my neighbor painted their house bright pink, I'd be really offended.
but
Roofing is generally not considered a problem these days in some places, some
well, in
jurisdictions.
Portland, I mean, and someday it'll be here. And, you know, I've done renovations that I'm sure the brown windows on the Sea Dog building would not be allowed if there was some committee here deciding whether or not I could put brown windows. There was a reason for that at the time. The facade of the Thomas Michaels space, when we did that, people didn't like that. Now everyone seems to love it. I'm sure all the historic buildings that were torn down on that list were, I'm sure another generation tore down historic buildings to build those historic buildings that we're now worried are gone. It just seems crazy that these things are allowed to, you know, where, you know, you don't want to start an HOA in the whole town, but you don't mind starting an HOA in my neighborhood and in the other, you know, that's essentially what you're creating in these different districts is an HOA that.
I don't see it that way, but I
That's how
understand.
you described it. When he said, why don't we do it town-wide, you said, well, I don't want to start it, you know, then it becomes looking like an HOA. Well, why doesn't it look like an HOA in High Street right now if this comes to pass?
Because I don't think the standards that we're talking about in any way approach an HOA.
They always start like this. This is how it starts, and then the next.
Yeah, they're defined by the Secretary of the Interior. These are not arbitrary rules that get changed. They're all voted by the town, approved by the town.
These things, like I said, the history of these types of historic preservation groups describe it. And like I said, I think this is all well intentioned. I've tried to do all of the renovations and the construction I've done. You know, I like to think I'm a good steward of the properties that I buy and renovate. But you know, Camden is like it is because of people who have come along and bought buildings, renovated them, and you know, the idea that some group, some point in time, can decide that this is now what the town has to be forever. We're going to tell you whether or not you can, you know, take the shutters off in front of your window, which is, you know, or whether you can change the railing on the front steps of your house. And these are all things that I've had to deal with in Portland. I actually had an insurance company. I have a building in the old port that has ivy all over it. So we judged one of the nicest buildings in downtown Portland. Insurance company tried to tell me I had to take the ivy off. The historic preservation people told me I couldn't take the ivy off. Luckily, I didn't want to take the ivy off, so I followed the insurance company and paid a little extra money and got to keep the ivy. But this is what happens to these things, and it's
I understand the concern, and the concern is shared by everyone on the committee, and I do not think that's the direction this goes. So,
But
I understand your, yeah.
one issue is that, I mean, I've looked at the Castine ordinance. The intention that you express not to get into that level of detail, to not be an HOA, that's going to be very difficult to draft into an ordinance in a way that's going to be meaningful and that's going to actually restrict, you know, your review in a way that I would be comfortable with. I mean, that's going to be very difficult.
I understand, and I agree, but a preservation ordinance does endeavor to preserve. So it is going to have standards, it is going to have restrictions. It's just, where does the community want to land?
Right. Well, this ordinance really doesn't have standards because it applies, you need a historic preservation certificate with respect to any change in the exterior appearance other than paint. Okay? So if I change anything, then I have to look at the 93-page manual, and it has examples. If you're going to replace a door, you know, get pictures, you know, historical pictures of what the door used to look like, you know, when somebody built it back in.
It does make distinctions between major changes and minor changes and maintenance. So it's not anything but restoration, and changes to the character of the property would go to review.
I don't think minor changes are excluded with respect to covered structures. So,
No, minor changes are excluded, but
yeah, I'm not, well,
anyway, I think we're
yeah, I don't want to
maybe
get
in
too
an
much.
unproductive place.
These are all points that we have considered, and we haven't written the ordinance. We have an ordinance written, but we have lots of changes to be made, and that's one of the questions that has come up.
Yeah.
Often.
Right. But circling back to my point, it's going to
And
be
it's-
very
and
difficult to
it's-
draft standards into this in a way that's going to be acceptable to everybody who currently owns one of these properties. I mean, good luck. I'm happy to pitch in and help. I've drafted a lot of ordinances in my time, but it's that experience leads me to believe that this is not going to be easy. So, I mean, because the more standards you have, the more limits you have, the more detailed you have to be. I think you said you don't necessarily want to be detailed, you want to be general. But if you're general, then you have a lot of discretion. And one of the aspects of the structure is, if you guys make a decision, if you have a lot of discretion and you make a decision, I mean, my understanding of the way, you know, litigation works is that it's going to be very difficult to overturn that, because, you know, a decision that you guys make is not going to be easy for a homeowner to go challenge. And I'm curious, when you talk to the other folks who have these ordinances, is there any litigation history with these? I mean, have people
I'm sure
challenged
there
the
are,
city?
but I don't know.
Yeah, I'd just be curious about that, you know, because that's potential liability for, you know, the town, for potentially you. But I'm just curious if there have been issues.
Not that they don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you.
Mhm. I mean, I don't expect there to be a large number of historical review. We're not talking about 30, 40, 50 applications a year. We're probably talking between 5 and 10 a year. But
I spent the day gathering materials to build a small paver patio that I'm going to put a grill on. That's visible from the street. Because everything in my property is visible from the street because it's a tiny lot. It's like 0.3 acres.
Mhm.
Under this Castine ordinance, I would have to get a certificate from you to approve me building that. So when you say, well, we don't want to look at everything, if your ordinance looks like this, you're going to be looking at everything. Well, assuming people pay attention to it.
We're not Castine.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
If there were to be an ordinance, and because it was on the warrant and it got voted,
I'm sorry.
we have to
because-
write an ordinance. It was approved by the voters, so we do have to create some kind of ordinance. What do you think should be included in it?
That it's not mandatory, that it's
That it's a
advisory only,
voluntary?
that it's a Rockland style ordinance.
Do you think it should include just demolition, or should it include renovation and restoration as well?
If it's advisory, then it can include anything.
Okay,
I mean,
I'm
but
just
it-
trying to pick your
I
brain.
mean, demolition, so, I mean, Castine not only includes demolition, but also if I'm going to build something new anywhere in a historic district, I mean, whether it's a whole house or whether it's, a garden shed, you have to approve that too.
So you think it should be voluntary and advisory only? That would be
my
okay.
strong preference.
Okay.
I mean, and again, that's based on, if we're basing things on history. I mean, the history of Camden, even though I've only been here for a few years, but I mean, the history of Camden is that people are sensitive to this. They do pay attention. I mean, when I rebuilt my barn, it still looks on the outside like a barn, even though it's not a barn anymore. It's living space. So I have a fake door on one side because there used to be a door there. Now behind that door is just a hallway, but because it should have a door there. I mean, a barn has a door there. So I see a lot of nice things that have been done to the houses, the Chestnut Street and the High Street.
do you, just to counter that a little bit, when homes were demoed here in the last few years, there was an outcry. Why isn't there somebody who's stopping that? Why doesn't the Historic Resources Committee stop that? The advisory capacity gets just as much criticism as a potential oversight or approval commission. So it's not, we have been an advisory committee since 1992, and we're constantly being told, why don't you have more authority? Why don't you have more teeth? Why isn't there something in the code preventing this or the other thing? We can look to the Montgomery Dam discussion, and people were clamoring for us to do more. But we are currently an advisory committee. That's all we are.
One consequence of letting people own property is that they may do stuff with it that you don't like. I mean, this is America. So, I mean, when you move to someplace like this, you're probably not going to, do something that's completely goofy. This isn't the place to do that. There are plenty of places to do that. This isn't one.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, thank you. Any more questions?
The second Monday, if you'd like.
Yeah.
4:00.
We're looking for a few good alternates.
Any more questions? Online? Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your input, and hope to continue the conversation. Thank you.